Velthar's hands trembled as he reached for his water cup. This part of his testimony was the most difficult to recount. Even the judges in the courtroom seemed to sense his distress. 2 years after the asteroid belt campaign, something unexpected happened, Velthar began. Earth erupted into civil war. A dispute over colony rights and resource distribution split humanity into 2 factions, the Northern Coalition and the Southern Federation. The alien commander paused, remembering how shocked the galactic community had been by this development. Most species assumed that humans would resolve their internal disputes through negotiation, as civilized beings should. The idea of humans fighting other humans seemed almost impossible to believe. The Galactic Council decided to send observer teams to Earth, Velthar continued. We thought we could help mediate the dispute and prevent unnecessary violence. Many species had experience with internal conflicts, and we believed our wisdom could guide humanity toward peaceful resolution. Velthar had volunteered for the observer mission himself. After fighting alongside humans for years, he felt he understood them better than most aliens. He thought his experience would be valuable in helping resolve what everyone assumed would be a brief political crisis. I was assigned to observe General Tae-hyun of the Northern Coalition, Velthar said. He was a veteran of both the Zephyrian and Synthesis campaigns. I expected him to be reasonable and open to negotiation. I was completely wrong. The alien commander described his first meeting with General Tae-hyun. The human officer had received him politely but with obvious impatience. When Velthar explained the Galactic Council's offer to mediate, the general had laughed bitterly. General Tae-hyun told me that this was not a dispute that could be resolved through negotiation, Velthar continued. He said the Southern Federation had committed acts that made peaceful coexistence impossible. When I asked what acts he meant, his answer chilled me to the bone. Velthar remembered the general's exact words. Commander, they attacked our children. They bombed civilian colonies that had no military value. They crossed lines that cannot be uncrossed. This is no longer a political dispute. This is a war of survival. I tried to explain that both sides probably had legitimate grievances, Velthar said. I suggested that compromise might be possible if both factions made concessions. General Tae-hyun just stared at me for a long moment. Then he said something that made me realize how little I understood about human nature. The general had spoken quietly, but with absolute conviction. Commander, you do not understand humans. When we fight aliens, we fight for victory. When we fight each other, we fight for existence. There is no compromise in a war for existence. Admiral Mi Young of the Southern Federation told me almost exactly the same thing, Velthar continued. When I met with her 3 days later, she used nearly identical words. Both sides saw the conflict as a fight for their survival as distinct human cultures. Velthar described how quickly the situation escalated. Within a week of his arrival on Earth, both sides had moved from political maneuvering to active military operations. The speed of the transition from peace to total war shocked all the alien observers. Captain Jin-ho was General Tae-hyun's orbital strike coordinator, Velthar said. I watched him plan attacks on Southern Federation cities with the same calm efficiency he had once used against alien enemies. When I asked if he felt any hesitation about attacking fellow humans, he looked at me with confusion. The captain had explained that the Southern Federation forces were enemy combatants, regardless of their species. He pointed out that they were trying to kill him and his comrades. Their humanity was irrelevant to the tactical situation. Captain Jin-ho said something that revealed the true horror of human civil war. Velthar continued. He said, Commander, humans know exactly how to hurt other humans. We understand their psychology, their weaknesses, their fears. When we fight aliens, we have to learn these things. When we fight each other, we already know them. Velthar watched in horror as the human civil war unfolded. Both sides used tactics that seemed designed to cause maximum psychological damage to their opponents. They targeted symbols of cultural identity, historical monuments, and locations with emotional significance. Major Ye-jin led Northern Coalition ground forces in the Battle of New Seoul, Velthar said. I observed her operations from the command center. She did not just attack military targets. She systematically destroyed everything that represented Southern Federation identity and culture. The major had explained her strategy with disturbing clarity. By destroying cultural symbols and historical sites, she could break the enemy's will to continue fighting. Physical victory would follow psychological defeat. just as it had in the wars against alien species. The most shocking moment came when I watched Major Yejin coordinate an attack on a Southern Federation memorial site. Velthar continued. The memorial honored human soldiers who had died fighting the Zephyrian Hive. I asked her how she could attack a monument to human heroes. Velthar remembered the Major's cold response. Commander, those soldiers died fighting for all of humanity. The Southern Federation has betrayed that legacy by attacking innocent colonies. Destroying their false shrines is an act of justice, not vandalism. The logic was twisted but internally consistent. Each side believed they represented true humanity, while their opponents had become traitors to human values. This belief justified any level of violence or destruction. Commander Sungmin served as a liaison between the observer teams and Northern Coalition forces, Velthar said. He was supposed to help us understand the human perspective on the conflict. Instead, he taught me something terrifying about human warfare. Velthar described a conversation with Commander Sungmin that had shattered his last illusions about human nature. The commander had calmly explained that humans had been fighting civil wars for their entire recorded history. They had refined and perfected the art of fighting their own kind over thousands of years. Commander Sungmin told me that human civil wars were always more brutal than their external wars, Velthar said. He explained that when humans fight aliens, they see enemies who are different and alien. When they fight other humans, they see enemies who chose to become different. The betrayal makes the hatred more personal and more intense. The commander had provided historical examples from Earth's past. He described wars where human societies had torn themselves apart with savage efficiency. He explained that the current conflict was actually mild compared to some of humanity's historical civil wars. The war lasted only 6 months, Velthar continued. By the end, both sides had inflicted casualties that exceeded their losses in all previous alien conflicts combined. The Southern Federation surrendered when the Northern Coalition threatened to destroy their capital city with orbital bombardment. Velthar remembered the surrender ceremony. Both sides had looked exhausted and traumatized, but they had also looked grimly satisfied, as if they had proven something important to themselves and to the watching galaxy. After the war ended, I asked General Taehyun if he regretted the destruction and casualties, Velthar said. He thought about the question for a long time before answering. Then he said, Commander, we did what was necessary to preserve our way of life. If we had not fought, we would have ceased to exist as a distinct culture. Death is preferable to cultural extinction. The alien commander looked around the courtroom at the hundreds of disturbed faces staring back at him. The human civil war taught the galaxy a terrible lesson, Velthar said. We learned that humans do not moderate their tactics based on who they are fighting. They bring the same total commitment to victory whether they face aliens or their own kind. Perhaps more frightening, they seem to understand each other's weaknesses with devastating clarity. Velthar's voice grew quiet and ominous. After watching humans fight each other, many species began to ask a disturbing question. What would happen if humanity ever decided that the rest of the galaxy was a threat to their survival? We would soon learn the answer to that question in the most terrifying way possible. Velthar stared at the ceiling of the courtroom for a moment before continuing his testimony. The memory of Kepler 442b still felt fresh even after all these years. The planet Kepler 442b was supposed to be an easy victory, he began. The Zephyrian Hive had taken control of the mining colonies there. These insect-like beings had built their usual underground tunnels and defensive positions. We had been fighting them for 6 months with no success. The alien commander's voice grew steady as he fell into the rhythm of military reporting. The Zephyrians are excellent defensive fighters. They dig complex tunnel systems that connect their surface bases. When we attack one position, they simply retreat underground and pop up somewhere else. Our orbital bombardments were useless because we could not target what we could not see. Several aliens in the courtroom nodded. The Zephyrian Hive was known throughout the galaxy for their defensive tactics. Their insect nature made them natural tunnel builders, and their hive mind allowed perfect coordination between different positions. My battalion had lost 30% of our forces in failed attacks, Velthar continued. The other allied units were in similar condition. Morale was low. We were discussing a strategic withdrawal when the human ships arrived. Velthar remembered watching the human fleet drop out of hyperspace. Their ships looked strange compared to the sleek vessels of other species. Human ships were blocky and practical, with too many weapons and not enough decoration. They looked like tools of war rather than symbols of civilization. Major Boram came to our command post that same day, Velthar said. She was a middle-aged woman with gray streaks in her black hair. She wore simple combat armor with no medals or fancy decorations. When she looked at our tactical displays, she did not seem impressed. The Major had studied their battle reports in silence. The Catherian and Etherian commanders had explained their careful strategies, their attempts to minimize civilian casualties, their efforts to preserve the mining infrastructure. Major Boram had listened politely, asking few questions. Then Major Boram asked to see the underground tunnel maps. Velthar continued. We showed her what our scanners had detected. The tunnel system was huge, covering most of the continent. The Major stared at the display for a long time. Then she said something that shocked us all. Velthar paused, remembering the exact words. She said, "Why are you trying to fight them underground? Just collapse the tunnels and force them to the surface." Velthar's voice carried a note of old disbelief. We explained that collapsing the tunnels would destroy the mining equipment and possibly kill civilian workers, who might be trapped inside. Major Boram just shrugged and said, "Then they will surrender faster." A ripple of disturbed murmurs ran through the courtroom. The idea of deliberately destroying civilian infrastructure to gain military advantage was shocking to most galactic species. The human plan was simple and terrible. Velthar continued. They would use seismic charges to collapse the main tunnel arteries. This would force the Zephyrians to abandon their underground positions and fight on the surface, where our superior firepower could be effective. Velthar described how Corporal Seung-ho had led the demolition teams. The young human soldier had approached the task with frightening efficiency. He studied the geological surveys, calculated exactly where to place the charges, and worked out the timing to cause maximum tunnel collapse. I asked Corporal Seung-ho if he was concerned about the civilian workers. Velthar said. He looked at me with confusion and said, "Sir, those workers have been prisoners for 6 months. If we do not act now, they will be prisoners forever. Some of them might die in the tunnel collapse, but all of them will die if we fail to retake the planet." The logic was cold but undeniable. The Zephyrians had been using the captured workers as human shields, making the Allied forces hesitant to use their full firepower. The humans simply removed that protection by making the underground positions uninhabitable. Private Eugene volunteered for the most dangerous job. Velthar continued, his voice growing quieter. She would plant charges deep inside enemy territory. The mission had almost no chance of success and no chance of survival. When I asked her why she volunteered, she said it was her duty. Velthar remembered the young woman's calm face as she prepared for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. Private Eugene had checked her equipment methodically, said goodbye to her squad mates, and walked into the tunnel system alone. Private Eugene managed to plant 3 of her 4 charges before the Zephyrians detected her, Velthar said. Instead of trying to escape, she deliberately triggered the alarm systems to draw more enemies to her position. Then she detonated all her remaining explosives at once. The explosion had been visible from orbit. The underground tunnel network that had protected the Zephyrians for months collapsed in a matter of minutes. Thousands of insect soldiers found themselves trapped on the surface with nowhere to retreat. The surface battle lasted only 4 hours, Velthar continued. Without their tunnel network, the Zephyrians could not use their usual tactics. Our orbital bombardments and ground forces crushed them completely. After 6 months of stalemate, the humans had given us total victory in a single day. But victory had come at a cost that still bothered Velthar. The human tactics had been effective, but they had also been brutal in ways that other species found difficult to accept. Sergeant Wu Jin explained their philosophy to me after the battle, Velthar said. He told me that humans learned long ago that the kindest thing you can do in war is to end it as quickly as possible. Every day a war continues, more people die on both sides. Better to fight one terrible day than to fight 100 careful ones. The sergeant had pointed out that their quick victory had actually saved lives in the long run. The slow, careful approach favored by other species would have resulted in months more fighting and thousands more casualties on both sides. But what disturbed me most was not their tactics, Velthar continued. It was their attitude. The humans did not celebrate their victory. They did not seem proud of their clever strategy. Major Boram looked at the casualty reports and just nodded. as if everything had gone exactly as expected. Velthar described the human soldiers after the battle. They efficiently processed prisoners, secured the area, and began rebuilding operations. They showed no signs of the battle madness that affected many species after violent combat. They simply moved on to the next task. I asked Major Boram how her soldiers stayed so calm after such a brutal fight. Velthar said. She looked at me with those quiet eyes and said, "Commander, this was not a brutal fight. This was just Tuesday." The alien commander let that statement hang in the air for a moment. That was when I began to understand, Velthar continued. What we considered extreme and shocking, humans considered normal and routine. The tactics that horrified us were just standard operating procedure for them. They had not become monsters to win this battle. They had always been monsters. They just usually kept it hidden. Velthar looked around the courtroom at the hundreds of alien faces staring back at him. After Kepler 442b, word spread through the Allied forces about human capabilities, he said. Some units requested human support for difficult missions. Other units requested to be transferred away from human operations. Everyone wanted to know what other surprises humanity might have in store. The alien commander's voice grew grim. We did not have to wait long to find out. 3 weeks later, we received new orders. The coalition was launching a major offensive against the Synthesis Collective in the asteroid belt. Once again, humans would be involved. Once again, I would learn that everything I thought I knew about warfare was wrong. Velthar shifted in his seat, his forearms moving restlessly as he prepared to continue his testimony. The next part of his story was even harder to tell than the first. The asteroid belt campaign began 3 months after Kepler 442b, he said. Our target was the Synthesis Collective, a race of beings that merged organic tissue with mechanical parts. They had built massive industrial complexes throughout the asteroid belt, turning space rocks into weapons factories. The alien commander paused to organize his thoughts. The Synthesis Collective had been one of the most dangerous enemies the galaxy had ever faced. Their technology allowed them to rapidly convert raw materials into military hardware, making them nearly impossible to defeat through traditional warfare. The collective had turned hundreds of asteroids into fortress stations, Velthar continued. Each station was heavily defended and could produce its own replacement fighters and weapons. Our intelligence estimated it would take years to capture them all through conventional assault. Velthar remembered the strategy briefings before the campaign began. The Allied forces had planned a careful, methodical advance. They would capture stations one by one, minimizing damage to preserve the valuable industrial equipment for their own use after the war. Colonel Namsu attended our planning sessions as the human representative, Velthar said. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke during the meetings. When other commanders presented their careful plans, he just listened and took notes. We thought he was learning from our experience. The colonel had seemed reasonable enough. He asked intelligent questions about enemy defenses and logistics. He studied the tactical displays with obvious interest. Nothing about his behavior suggested the shocking revelations that were to come. On the third day of planning, Colonel Namsu finally spoke up. Velthar continued. He asked a simple question. Why are we trying to capture the factories intact? And we explained that the industrial equipment was valuable and would be useful after the war. The colonel just nodded and said, I see. You are fighting a war for profit. The other commanders had been offended by this suggestion. They were fighting to protect galactic civilization from the Synthesis Collective's aggression. The idea that they might be motivated by economic gain was insulting. Colonel Namsu apologized for his poor choice of words, Velthar said. But then he explained the human perspective on warfare. He said that humans had learned to focus only on the primary objective, defeating the enemy completely. Everything else was secondary. Velthar described how the colonel had presented the human battle plan. Instead of trying to capture the asteroid factories, they would destroy them. Instead of preserving enemy equipment, they would eliminate the collective's ability to produce new weapons. Instead of a careful advance, they would launch a devastating assault designed to end the war quickly. The human plan was called Total Industrial Warfare, Velthar continued. Admiral So Young explained it to us in detail. They would not just attack military targets. They would attack everything that supported the enemy war effort. Factories, supply depots, communication networks, even mining operations on distant worlds. The concept had been difficult for other species to accept. Galactic warfare traditionally focused on military objectives. Attacking civilian infrastructure was considered barbaric and counterproductive. Admiral So Young showed us historical examples from Earth, Velthar said. She told us about human wars where entire nations had mobilized their complete industrial capacity for military production. In those wars, there was no clear distinction between military and civilian targets, because everything contributed to the war effort. The Admiral had been patient but firm in explaining human doctrine. She pointed out that the Synthesis Collective had already militarized their entire society. Every factory, every mining station, every transport ship was part of their war machine. Treating them as civilian targets would be a dangerous fiction. Captain Hyunwoo commanded the human stealth ships, Velthar continued. His job was to infiltrate deep behind enemy lines and attack targets that other species considered off-limits. Communication relays, supply convoys, even asteroid mining operations that had no direct military function. Velthar remembered his conversation with Captain Hyunwoo before the mission began. The human officer had calmly explained that his ships would be targeting economic infrastructure to degrade enemy industrial capacity. The clinical language could not hide the brutal reality of what he planned to do. I asked Captain Hyunwoo if he was concerned about killing civilian workers. Velthar said. He looked at me with surprise and said, "Commander, there are no civilians in this war. The collective has turned their entire population into a military production system. Every worker is a combatant, every factory is a weapon." The human captain had pulled up intelligence reports showing how the Synthesis Collective operated. Their society had no distinction between military and civilian functions. Children were raised in weapons factories. Scientists worked exclusively on military projects. Even artists created propaganda to support the war effort. Captain Hyunwoo said something that still haunts me, Velthar continued. He said, "If we leave their factories intact, they will rebuild their fleet in 6 months and attack us again. If we destroy everything, they will need years to recover. Which approach actually saves more lives?" The logic was cold but compelling. The Synthesis Collective had shown no interest in negotiated peace. They would continue fighting until they were completely defeated or until they had conquered everyone else. Half measures would only prolong the conflict. Lieutenant Commander Eunji led the Information Warfare Division, Velthar said. Her job was to attack enemy communication networks and spread false information to create confusion and panic among collective forces. Velthar described watching Eunji work. The young woman sat at banks of computer equipment, methodically infiltrating enemy networks and planting false data. She created fake intelligence reports, disrupted supply schedules, and even sent contradictory orders to different collective units. Lieutenant Commander Eunji explained that humans had developed these techniques during their own planetary wars, Velthar said. She called it cognitive warfare, attacking the enemy's ability to think clearly and make good decisions. She said it was often more effective than attacking their weapons directly. The human approach to information warfare shocked the other allied species. Most galactic civilizations considered deception and lies to be dishonorable tactics. They preferred to defeat enemies through superior strategy and firepower, not through trickery and confusion. The results of the human strategy were devastating, Velthar continued. Within 2 weeks, the Synthesis Collective's industrial capacity had been reduced by 70%. Their communication networks were in chaos. Their supply lines had collapsed completely. Velthar described the final phase of the campaign. The Collective's asteroid fortresses, cut off from supplies and reinforcements, began surrendering one by one. The enemy that had seemed impossible to defeat through conventional means collapsed in less than a month. But the cost was terrible, Velthar said quietly. Entire asteroid communities had been destroyed. Thousands of collective workers had died in the attacks on industrial facilities. The galaxy had never seen such widespread destruction in a single campaign. The alien commander looked around the courtroom at the disturbed faces of his audience. When I questioned Admiral So Young about the casualties, she gave me a response I will never forget, Velthar said. She said, "Commander, we could have fought this war for 5 years using your methods. Millions would have died on both sides and the result would have been the same. We chose to fight it for 1 month. The total death toll is actually much lower." Velthar had checked the numbers himself. The Admiral was correct. The quick, brutal human approach had actually resulted in fewer total casualties than a prolonged conventional war would have caused. But something about the deliberate, calculated nature of the destruction still felt wrong. After the asteroid belt campaign, the galaxy began to see humans differently. Velthar continued. They were no longer the curious newcomers asking for guidance. They had become the species that other civilizations called, when they needed someone destroyed completely and efficiently. The alien commander's voice grew heavy with foreboding. But even then, we had not seen the worst of what humans were capable of. That revelation would come later, when we discovered how humans fought against their own kind. The large courtroom was silent. Hundreds of different alien species sat in rows watching the witness stand. The air felt heavy with tension. At the center of it all sat Commander Velthar, his blue skin looking pale under the bright lights. Velthar had 4 arms and stood nearly 8 feet tall. His chitinous shell bore scars from countless battles. Today, those scars seemed to ache more than usual. He gripped the metal rail in front of him with all 4 hands, trying to stop them from shaking. The chief judge, a tall being with tentacles for arms, spoke in a deep voice. Commander Velthar of the Catherian Empire, you have served in 3 galactic wars. Today you will tell us about the humans. Please begin your testimony. Velthar's throat felt dry. He had fought alongside many species during his long military career. He had seen the elegant tactics of the Etherian fleet. He had witnessed the brutal strength of the Draconian Legion. But nothing had prepared him for humans. Your honors, Velthar began, his voice barely above a whisper. I have seen things that will haunt me until my dying day. The humans, they are not like us. They do not fight like us. They do not think like us. He paused, looking around the courtroom. Many of the alien observers leaned forward, curious about this young species called humanity. Earth had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago. Most species still saw them as primitive creatures from a small blue world. When I first heard about humans joining our war against the Zephyrian hive, I was not worried, Velthar continued. They were new to space warfare. Their technology was basic compared to ours. Their ships were smaller and weaker. I thought they would be useful only for simple support roles. A Catherian officer in the audience nodded. Many species had thought the same thing. Humans seemed harmless enough when they first appeared. They were curious and friendly. They asked many questions and seemed eager to learn from older civilizations. The humans sent their 3rd fleet to help us, Velthar said. Their commander was Admiral So Young. She was a small woman, maybe 5.5 feet tall. She had dark hair and calm eyes. When she walked into our strategy meeting, some of our generals actually laughed. Velthar remembered that day clearly. Admiral So Young had entered the war room wearing a simple gray uniform. She carried no fancy weapons or decorations. Compared to the towering Catherian generals with their ceremonial armor, she looked like a child. Admiral So Young did not seem bothered by the laughter. Velthar went on. She simply asked for our tactical reports. When we showed her our battle plans, she studied them for a long time. Then she asked a question that confused us all. The courtroom was completely quiet now. Even the translators had stopped their quiet humming. She asked, "How many enemy soldiers are you willing to kill to win this war?" Velthar's voice grew stronger as he spoke. We told her we wanted to minimize casualties on both sides. We believed in honorable warfare. Clean victories with minimal loss of life. Velthar closed his eyes, remembering the look on Admiral So Young's face. It was not anger or disappointment. It was something else. Something that made his skin crawl even now. Admiral So Young nodded slowly. Then she said something I will never forget. She said, "We will kill as many as needed. We will do whatever it takes to win." That is what war means to humans. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Several alien species shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Etherians, known for their philosophical approach to conflict, looked particularly disturbed. At first we thought she was just trying to sound tough, Velthar explained. Many young species try to impress older civilizations with bold words. But as the days passed, we began to see that Admiral So Young meant exactly what she said. Velthar spoke about the human officers he met during those early days. There was Captain Dong Min, a quiet man who always seemed to be thinking about something terrible. Lieutenant Heiwan spoke softly but carried herself like a predator. Sergeant Wu Jin had kind eyes, but those eyes had seen things that would break most beings. The humans brought strange equipment with them, Velthar continued. Not just weapons, but tools we had never seen before. They had books about something called psychological warfare. They carried devices for intercepting enemy communications. Most disturbing of all, they brought medical equipment designed to keep soldiers fighting even when badly wounded. The judge with tentacles raised one appendage. "Commander, please explain what you mean by psychological warfare." Velthar struggled to find the right words. "Your Honor, most species fight to defeat the enemy's military forces. Humans fight to break the enemy's will to continue fighting. They study how their enemies think, what they fear, what makes them lose hope. Then they use that knowledge as a weapon." Several aliens in the courtroom made sounds of disgust. The concept was foreign to most galactic civilizations. Wars were fought between armies, not against the minds of entire populations. "Captain Dongmin explained it to me once," Velthar said. "He told me that humans learned long ago that the fastest way to end a war is to make the enemy believe they cannot win. Physical victory follows mental defeat." Velthar paused to drink some water. His hands were shaking again, and drops spilled onto the metal surface in front of him. "The humans also brought something else with them," he continued. "They brought stories. Stories of their own wars on Earth. When I heard these stories, I began to understand why humans fight the way they do." The courtroom waited in silence. "Humans have been fighting wars for their entire history," Velthar said. "Not just battles between armies, but wars where their entire species was at risk. They have fought wars where losing meant complete destruction. They have fought wars where surrender was not an option." Velthar looked directly at the judges. "Your Honors, we fight wars to achieve political goals. Humans fight wars to survive. That difference changes everything." The alien commander took a deep breath. "What I am about to tell you will sound impossible, but I swear by my ancestors that every word is true. I have seen humans do things that no sane being would attempt. I have watched them win battles they should have lost. I have seen them turn certain defeat into total victory." The chief judge leaned forward. "Commander Velthar, this tribunal needs specific examples. Tell us about your first battle alongside human forces." Velthar nodded grimly. "Very well, Your Honor. Let me tell you about the Battle of Kepler 442b. Let me tell you about the day I learned to fear humanity's idea of warfare." Velthar's entire body was shaking now. The final part of his testimony would be the most difficult to tell. In the courtroom, even the air recycling system seemed to have grown quiet, as if the entire station was holding its breath. The siege of Alpha Centauri began in the final year of the Third Galactic War, Velthar said, his voice barely above a whisper. The hegemony had launched a surprise attack on humanity's closest colony system. They captured 3 worlds and took over 2 million human civilians as hostages. The alien commander paused, remembering the shock that had run through the galactic community when news of the attack reached them. The hegemony was a ruthless empire, but even they had never attempted such a large-scale hostage operation before. The hegemony's demand was simple, Velthar continued. They wanted Earth to surrender unconditionally and withdraw from all galactic affairs. In exchange, they would allow the human civilians to live as slaves in their empire. If Earth refused, they would execute all 2 million hostages. Velthar had been present at the emergency session of the Galactic Council when the hegemony's ultimatum was delivered. Most species assumed that humanity would have no choice but to negotiate. The lives of 2 million civilians seemed to outweigh any military considerations. The galactic community prepared for complex diplomatic negotiations, Velthar said. We expected months of careful bargaining to find a solution that would save the hostages while preserving human dignity. We were experts at this kind of crisis management. The alien commander described the confusion and dismay when Earth's response arrived. Instead of requesting mediation or proposing counteroffers, humanity had simply acknowledged receipt of the ultimatum and requested 48 hours to formulate their reply. Colonel Kyung-soo arrived at our command station 12 hours after the ultimatum was delivered, Velthar said. He was carrying sealed orders from Earth and had authority to speak for all human military forces. When he opened those orders in our presence, I saw something in his eyes that terrified me. Velthar remembered the colonel's face as he read the orders from Earth. There had been no surprise, no shock, no desperate hope for a miracle solution, just grim acceptance of what had to be done. Colonel Kyung-soo announced that humanity would implement something called the Pyrrhic Victory Protocol. Velthar continued. None of us had heard this term before. When we asked for an explanation, The colonel said it was a human military doctrine reserved for situations where compromise was impossible. The colonel had explained the protocol with clinical detachment. If an enemy took human civilians hostage to gain strategic advantage, humanity would respond by ensuring that the enemy gained nothing from their action, regardless of the cost to the hostages themselves. I asked Colonel Kyung-soo if he understood that this policy would result in the death of 2 million innocent people. Belthar said. He looked at me with those cold human eyes and said, "Commander, if we give in to this blackmail, 10 million humans will die in the next hostage crisis. Sometimes you must sacrifice some of your people to save all of your people." Velthar described the horror that swept through the Allied command as the implications became clear. Humanity was prepared to let their own civilians die rather than submit to enemy demands. It was a level of cold calculation that no other species could comprehend. General He-jin took personal command of Operation Scorched Earth. Velthar continued. Her orders were simple and terrifying. Deny the enemy any benefit from their hostage operation by destroying everything they had captured, including the hostages themselves. The general had assembled a task force of human volunteers for the mission. Every ship captain, every pilot, every soldier knew that they would be responsible for killing their own people. Not a single human officer had refused to participate. Admiral Jae-sung commanded the fleet that would carry out the actual operation, Velthar said. I met with him before the mission began. I begged him to reconsider, to find some alternative that might save at least some of the hostages. His response revealed the true horror of human strategic thinking. Velthar remembered the admiral's words exactly. Commander, the hegemony chose to make this a test of will rather than a test of strength. They believe humans will sacrifice anything to save our civilians. They are wrong. We will sacrifice everything to prove that hostage-taking will never work against us. The admiral had shown Velthar the tactical plans for Operation Scorched Earth. The human fleet would systematically destroy every hegemony installation in the Alpha Centauri system. They would target military bases, civilian infrastructure, mining operations, even the orbital platforms where human hostages were being held. Major Dahai piloted one of the ships assigned to destroy the hostage platforms. Velthar continued, his voice breaking slightly. I watched her prepare for the mission. She was calm and professional, checking her equipment and reviewing her target assignments. She showed no signs of the emotional turmoil that should have consumed anyone facing such a task. Velthar had tried one last time to appeal to human compassion. He had asked Major Dahai how she could bring herself to kill innocent civilians, including children and elderly people who had never harmed anyone. Major Dahai's answer haunts me to this day, Velthar said. She told me, Commander, those people are already dead. The hegemony killed them the moment they decided to use them as weapons against us. I am not murdering civilians. I am denying the enemy the use of human shields. The logic was twisted but unbreakable. By treating the hostages as already lost, the humans could justify any action that prevented the enemy from benefiting from their capture. The hostages had become acceptable casualties in a larger strategic game. Captain Wansik led the assault on the main hegemony command center, Velthar continued. His job was to ensure that no enemy leaders survived to repeat this type of operation. When I asked if he would accept surrender from hegemony forces, he shook his head. The captain had explained that accepting surrender would send the wrong message to future enemies. The Pyrrhic Victory Protocol required that hostage-takers receive no mercy, no quarter, and no opportunity to repeat their crimes. Total destruction was the only acceptable outcome. Operation Scorched Earth lasted 18 hours, Velthar said. By the end, the entire Alpha Centauri system was a graveyard. Every hegemony installation had been destroyed. Every enemy ship had been eliminated, and every human hostage was dead. Velthar described the eerie silence that followed the operation. The human fleet had accomplished its mission with perfect efficiency. 2 million civilians were dead, but the strategic message had been delivered with unmistakable clarity. The psychological impact on the hegemony was devastating, Velthar continued. They had expected humanity to negotiate, to compromise, to value individual lives over strategic principles. Instead, they had discovered that humans were willing to sacrifice their own people to deny enemy advantages. The hegemony's leadership had been shattered by the realization that their most powerful weapon, the threat to innocent lives, was useless against humanity. Within days, they had opened surrender negotiations, preferring defeat to the prospect of fighting an enemy that could not be blackmailed or intimidated. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity emerged victorious from what should have been their greatest defeat, Velthar said. By accepting the loss of 2 million civilians, they had saved potentially millions more by establishing that hostage-taking would never succeed against them. Velthar looked around the courtroom at the horrified faces of his audience. I attended the memorial service for the Alpha Centauri victims, he continued. General He-Jin spoke at the ceremony. She said that the dead civilians were not victims of human cruelty, but martyrs who had died to protect future generations from similar threats. The human population accepted this explanation and supported the government's decision. The alien commander's voice grew heavy with exhaustion and fear. That was when I finally understood the true nature of humanity, Velthar said. They are not just willing to sacrifice their enemies for victory. They are willing to sacrifice themselves. They will pay any price, accept any loss, endure any horror to achieve their strategic objectives. There is no threat you can make, no bargain you can offer, no line they will not cross. Velthar paused for a long moment, gathering his strength for his final words. The Third Galactic War ended 3 weeks after Alpha Centauri. Every enemy faction sued for peace rather than risk facing humanity's Pyrrhic victory protocol. The galaxy had learned a terrible lesson. There is no way to fight an enemy that values victory more than life itself.